Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Gaurangita, Jaya Gaurangita, Gaurangita, Shri Shri Gaurangita. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya. Oh, Rapayanandi. Okay, so start on welcome everybody to Srimad Bhagavad-gita class as it is, not as you like it. Maybe as you like it if you like it as it is. So we'll be reading from chapter 3, text 43 until chapter 4, text 9 or 11. Do we do 11, 10 or 11 verses? 11? Okay. So I'll read till 4:10. We'll start off by reciting the invocation mantras. Om Meghanyatamrandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tashmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamayam Dadanti Swaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagara Jatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Satjivam Sarvaitam Sarvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Svitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchkana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Turibhyascha Kripa Sindhuvyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we'll begin with chapter 3, text 43. We'll recite the Roman transliteration, the Sanskrit, and then the translation. Evam budhe param budva samstabhyat manam atmana jahi shatru mahabaho kama rupam durasadam. Translation. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to material senses, mind, and intelligence, one should control the self by the higher self, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. Chapter 4, Text 1. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Imam Vivasvate Yogam Proktavan Aham Avyayam Vivasvan Manave Praha Manor Ikshvakave Bravit. Translation. The Blessed Lord said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivasvan, and Vivasvan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. Text 2. Evam parampara praptam imam rajashrayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashta parantapa. Translation. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. Text 3. Sa eva maya tedya yoga prokta puratanaha bhaktosi me sakha cheti rahasyam yetar uttamam. Translation. That very ancient science of the relationship with the Supreme is today told by me to you because you are my devotee as well as my friend. Therefore, you can understand the transcendental mystery of this science. Text 4. Arjuna Uvacha Aparam bhavato janma param janma vivasvataha katam etad vijaniyam tvam ada proktavan iti. Translation. Arjuna said, the sun god Vivasvan is senior by birth to you. How am I to understand that in the beginning you instructed this science to him? Text 5. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Bahuni me vyatitani janmani tavacharjuna tanyaham veda sarvani natvam veda parantapa. Translation. The Blessed Lord said, many, many births both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subduer of the enemy. Text 6. Ajopi san navyayat Ma Bhutanam Ishvaropi san Prakritim Swamadhishtaya Sambhavam Yatmamayaya. Translation. Although I am unborn and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all sentient beings, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. Text 7. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata adyutanam dharmasya tadatmanam shrijam yaham. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharata, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. Text 8. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chaduskritam dharma samstapanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Translation. In order to deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to reestablish the principles of religion, I advent myself millennium after millennium. Text 9. Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo viti tatvataha tyaktva deham punar janma naite mam eti so Arjuna. Translation. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and my activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Text 10. Vittaraga bhaya krodha manmaya mamupashritaha bahavo jnana tapasa bhuta madbhavam agataha. Translation. being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me. Last text, text 11. Ye yata mam prapajante tam stataiva bhajam yaham mama vartma nuvartante manusya partha sarvashaha. All of them, as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Pritha. Okay, so we'll go back to chapter 3, text 43. We'll close this chapter out. Translation. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to material senses, mind, and intelligence, one should control the lower self by the higher self, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. Purport and also translations done by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jaya. So, purport. This third chapter of the Bhagavad-gita is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without considering impersonal voidness as the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overlording and sense gratification are the greatest enemies of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and the mind, by steady intelligence directed toward one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so-called practice of yogic postures can never help a man toward spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. So we get a nice summary here of the third chapter. We should know ourselves as the eternal servitor of the Lord, knowing that we're not the body, we're a spirit soul. And by doing that, by knowing that, and by practicing Krishna consciousness through devotional service, we can give up the propensities for lust and the desire for dominating the resources of material nature, which are very prominent in conditioned souls. This lust for wanting material things, or it's all material things, right? Material bodies, money, so many desires that one could have. But if we practice Krishna consciousness, slowly we're able to turn our material senses into transcendental senses and seek that higher taste, param jishtva nivartate, and become purified enough to enter the Brahma Bhuta stage, and then be able to practice pure Krishna consciousness without any tinge of mental speculation or fruit of activity or any kind of sense gratification. We'll be able to taste that nectar all the time. We'll be able to see the Lord everywhere, as an Uttama Bhagavat would be able to see that, a learned and gentle Brahmin, by having this Pandita Darshinaha, sees with equal vision a learned Brahmin, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater as all on the same platform, as all spirit souls. But of course, since we have this lust, we don't see that way. We see, how can I take advantage of this person, or how can I take advantage of that person? How does my false ego play out in daily life? So many different things affect us, but by chanting Hare Krishna, we can overcome such petty lust and enter into the real world of serving the Lord, our eternal positions, not this temporary, illusory position thinking that my body and everything I own around me is mine. Yeah. But we should not think we can just give up our duties and enter into the forest and chant Hare Krishna, because we will still be disturbed there by all of that lust that's in our heart. So we can't enter the forest unless the mirror has been cleaned. And of course, it's not recommended by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada wanted us to preach to the other conditioned souls out there and help them to come up higher, even though they just might like see us on the plaza or something, or come to the temple once and we don't see them again, at least for the time we've been here. They're still making progress each life. They're still making a little progress. And what to speak of the little amounts of progress we've made in our past lives, and somehow and in some way, by the mercy of Guru and the devotees, we've come to reside at the temple, or we've come to listen on Zoom every day or often. We're very fortunate. Very fortunate to get this instruction. Okay, we'll go to chapter 4. Text 1. The Blessed Lord said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivasvan, and Vivasvan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. Purport. Herein we find the history of the Bhagavad-gita traced from a remote time when it was delivered to the royal order, the kings of all planets. This science is especially meant for the protection of the inhabitants, and therefore the royal order should understand it in order to be able to rule the citizens and protect them from the material bondage to lust. Human life is meant for cultivation of spiritual knowledge and eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the executive heads of all states and all planets are obliged to impart this lesson to the citizens by education, culture, and devotion. Shri Shri Garnitai Ki Jai. In other words, the executive heads of all states are intended to spread the science of Krishna consciousness to all the people, so that all the people may take advantage of this great science and pursue a successful path, utilizing the opportunity of the human form of life. So this Bhagavad-gita isn't just some invention. It's eternal, just like the Lord is eternal. And it has in itself, the Bhagavad-gita says, this was taught to the sun god first. And then the sun god instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind. Manu instructed Ikshvaku, and on, just like we're receiving this nice knowledge through the chain of disciplic succession. It was passed down one person to the next. It's from a person, originally from Krishna. And Krishna is so merciful that he gives us this knowledge, this guidebook to understand material nature, time, karma, who we are, who the Lord is. So many different topics we can understand to enlighten ourselves on how to live properly, And how to attain knowledge, who to attain it from? So this Bhagavad-gita, arguably the most important book in the world, must be in every home. We should try to get it in every home out there, so people can start their journey into spiritual life. And if it's not taught or being taught like it is here, then we'll have the conditions that we have right now in most of the world, which is continual degradation, lack of spiritual instruction from so-called leaders, and just creates an increasingly deplorable situation for the citizens. Things that are propagated are actually destructive to human form of life. They bring one instead of to the next stage, spiritual world, they bring one down further into the pool of material life, and taking birth in the animal species or taking birth in the lower planetary systems. But thankfully, Srila Prabhupada came to the United States to pick us up from that and by his instruction and his teachings and efforts, this material world becomes like the hoof print of a calf, very small. So we can just step on over it. Like it says in Bhagavad-gita chapter 14, that we can easily cross over it. Maya metam taranti, cross over this material world, material life, and attain spiritual life, which is our eternal position. Text 2. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. Purport. It is clearly stated that the Gita was especially meant for the saintly kings because they were to execute its purpose in ruling over the citizens. Certainly, Bhagavad-gita was never meant for the demoniac persons who would dissipate its value for no one's benefit and would devise all types of interpretations according to personal whims. As soon as the original purpose was scattered by the motives of the unscrupulous commentators, there arose the need to reestablish the disciplic succession. 5,000 years ago, it was detected by the Lord himself that the disciplic succession was broken, and therefore he declared that the purpose of the Gita appeared to be lost. In the same way, at the present moment also, there are so many editions of the Gita, especially in English, but almost all of them are not according to authorized disciplic succession. There are innumerable interpretations rendered by different mundane scholars, but almost all of them do not accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, although they make a good business on the words of Sri Krishna. This spirit is demonic. Because demons do not believe in God, but simply enjoy the property of the Supreme. Since there is a great need of an edition of the Gita in English, as it is received by the Parampara disciplic succession system, an attempt is made herewith to fulfill this great want. Bhagavad-gita, accepted as it is a great boon to humanity. But if it is accepted as a treatise of philosophical speculations, it is simply a waste of time. So if we just hear from the Gita as it is, properly translated from Sanskrit to English, because unfortunately most people on the earth do not understand Sanskrit, then we get the truth. And Srila Prabhupada so kindly did that. Have most or some of you heard the story of how the Bhagavad-gita got published? No? Well, I only remember a few points. I know that in the beginning, this lady wrote to Srila Prabhupada and was asking if he had a Gita, and she was basically asking him, can you please make an edition of the Gita? And so at one point, he did actually have a manuscript of the Gita in India, but it was stolen, unfortunately. Someone was ready to pay for it and publish it, but it was stolen. So Krishna decided that then wasn't the time. So he had to wait until he got to the United States. So he's working very hard to write it and publish it and get it out there, because before that, they were using some other edition of the Gita, which didn't align with the actual meaning of the Gita. The commentary on it, like Prabhupada said, is all off. So he came out with this Gita, and one highlight of the story that I can recall right now is Brahmananda Prabhu was tasked with trying to find someone to publish it. And so he went to many different publishers and he was turned down by all of them. They were not interested. But then one day, Prabhupada called him in and said, now go to this publisher and say you've got the Gita. And so, and I'm not going to do this story quite the justice that Brahmananda does telling it, which you can look up on YouTube for sure, that pastime of Brahmananda publishing the Gita. But basically, he went to the publisher and the publisher, he went right to the publisher's office. The person itself just skipped through the secretaries, went right in and started talking to him. And I was like, telling them about this Gita, and he didn't even have the manuscript with him to look at. But the publisher just said, yeah, we'll publish it. Because it was part of this, their like wisdom literature series they were coming out with. And so they happily decided to publish it. And Prabhupada had predicted that would happen even without them having to show the manuscript. He said some words before Brahmananda went there that signaled that this was going to happen and it would be not much effort to get it published. So anyway, I encourage you to look up like the mystical publishing pastime that took place. I apologize for not being able to say it very well. So yeah, it's important, the intention. It's important to recognize the intention that a author has behind the work they've wrote or translated. And for many of us, the way that we understand that intention is by getting the recommendation of other devotees on what to read. And of course, in the neophyte stage, and actually throughout one's spiritual life, reading Srila Prabhupada's books is important. So we should continue to read Srila Prabhupada's books. And once we get advanced enough, and if by fortune have the recommendation of the spiritual master to delve deeper into Vedic knowledge, then we can take to reading the more advanced texts and further our exploration and deepening our love for Krishna. Because that's what these all are meant to do, is to deepen our love for Krishna, and also to give us a philosophical backing, philosophical foundation for our practice. To understand we're not doing this blindly, but we're doing it based on Shastra, Guru, and Sadhu. Well, I'm going to skip to text 9. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Purport. The Lord's descent from his transcendental abode is already explained in the 6th verse. One who can understand the truth of the appearance of the personality of Godhead is already liberated from material bondage, and therefore he returns to the kingdom of God immediately after quitting this present material body. Such liberation of the living entity from material bondage is not at all easy. The impersonalist and the yogis attain liberation only after much trouble and many, many births. Even then, the liberation they achieve, merging into the impersonal Brahmajyoti of the Lord, is only partial, and there's the risk of returning again to this material world. But the devotee, simply by understanding the transcendental nature of the body and activities of the Lord, attains the abode of the Lord after ending this body and does not run the risk of returning again to this material world. In the Brahma Samhita, it is stated that the Lord has many, many forms and incarnations. Advaitam achyutam anadam ananta rupam. Although there are many transcendental forms of the Lord, they are still one and the same Supreme Personality of Godhead. One has to understand this fact with conviction. Although it is incomprehensible to the mundane scholars and empiric philosophers. As stated in the Vedas, Eko Devo Nicha Lila Nurakto Bhakta Vyapi Hridyantaratma. The one Supreme Personality of Godhead is eternally engaged in many, many transcendental forms in relationship with his unalloyed devotees. This Vedic version is confirmed in this verse of the Gita personally by the Lord. He who accepts this truth on the strength of the authority of the Vedas and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and who does not waste time in philosophical speculations, attains the highest perfectional stage of liberation. Simply by accepting this truth on faith, one can, without a doubt, attain liberation. The Vedic version, Tattvamasi, is actually applied in this case. Anyone who understands Lord Krishna to be the Supreme, or who says unto the Lord, "You are the same Supreme Brahman, this personality of Godhead," is certainly liberated instantly. And consequently, his entrance into the transcendental association of the Lord is guaranteed. In other words, such a faithful devotee of the Lord attains perfection, and this is confirmed by following Vedic assertion. Tam eva viditwat ti mrityumeti nanya panta vijate ayanaya. One can attain the perfect stage of liberation from birth and death simply by knowing the Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There's no alternative, because anyone who does not understand Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead is surely in the mode of ignorance. Consequently, he will not attain salvation simply, so to speak, by licking the outer surface of the bottle of honey or by interpreting the Bhagavad-gita according to mundane scholarship. Such empiric philosophers may assume very important roles in the material world, but they are not necessarily eligible for liberation. Such puffed up mundane scholars have to wait for the causeless mercy of the devotee of the Lord. One should therefore cultivate Krishna consciousness with faith and knowledge, and in this way attain perfection. So knowing the transcendental nature of Krishna's appearance and his activities, and thinking about them at the time of death, guarantees one to enter into the spiritual world. But like Prabhupada said, it's not at all easy. We might know, oh, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but maybe we don't have faith in that all the time because we're choosing to act contrary to the truth taught in the Vedas that we're not our body. if we really understand that we're not our body, then we can always serve the Lord humbly. Because really we're the servant of the servant of the servant of Radha who serves Krishna. And so if we have that in mind, then we can have faith that will enter into the kingdom of God, enter into Goloka Vrindavan and take part in the pastimes there and serve nicely and be happy all the time. Okay, that's all I'm going to say tonight. Is there any questions, comments, chastisements, clarifications, so on? Yes, Jagannath Prabhu?
Hare Krishna. I was just wondering, because this came up, what publishing company did Brahmananda go to?
Macmillan.
Macmillan?
Yeah. Yeah. He had tried so many. Of course, now every one of Srila Prabhupada's works is published by Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. It's, so you don't have to worry about it being stopped at some point. It's devotee run. And, yeah, so nice. Okay. Magadari Prabhu?
Yeah, one time I was listening to some memories, and there was another devotee that was mentioning that in those early days there was a group there of devotees, and
In New York?
in New York, yeah, and they had regular classes on the Bhagavad-gita, and those were advertised Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Prabhupada would speak on the Bhagavad-gita in the evening. And this devotee, I forgot who it was, but he was saying they all had that copy that you were speaking of from the other publisher, from the other author. Mm-hmm. And Prabhupada told him, do not read the purports. And he said that they all had their copies that they would study from, but they wouldn't read the purports. And he said one time he read the purports, and it's famous. Prabhupada quotes it. He said, this is what the rascal commentator said. It is not to Krishna that you must surrender. It is to the unborn within Krishna. Yeah. And then the devotee was saying, yeah, after I read that, I knew I was completely bogus. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think it's the Ramakrishna Mission or something. Dr. Srila Prabhupada actually went to visit him in his old age, this who translated the Gita, and it's the original Gita they used, and he went to visit him. It's the stories told in the part 2 of Chasing Rhinos with the Swami, Shyamasundar Das Prabhu. And he was an invalid at the end of his life. His mind he wasn't there. He was there, but he had lost his faculties for thinking. But he got so mercifully got the association of Prabhupada near the end of his life. Yeah. Radhastali?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I just had a short comment, if that's Please. Okay. On this topic of Prabhupada writing, I was thinking that we are so fortunate we can closely and intimately associate with Prabhupada by reading his books, and he says that these are his ecstasies. This is his ecstasies in writing. It's amazing. it's just so foreign to me because I still have a long way to go spiritually, but it's so nice to hear from a pure devotee in this way, and that we're all sitting here together studying his words. So that's all I wanted to say. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Yeah, we can have unlimited association with Prabhupada. It's said that Vani is more important than Vapu, because though the form of the spiritual master might be gone, we will have his words, and we can have his words in our heart. Any other comments, questions? Okay, we'll end there. Srimad Bhagavad-gita ki jai. Vanchakalpa Trivascha Kripa Sindhubheva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.